Thank you, and thanks everybody for coming. I know it's been a choice, so I hope this talk will be interesting for you. So my name is Federico. I work at Contino as VP of Engineering. Contino is a global DevOps and cloud transformation company. This talk comes from our experience working with large enterprises, large scale-ups as well, adopting developer platforms, how companies at that scale have to operate. I've always been in technical roles before Contino. So what is the agenda here? Very quickly, we're going to talk about context, we're going to talk about developer platforms themselves, and then we're going to talk about build versus buy. Should we build one? Should we buy one? And the takeaways at the end. The session will last 25 minutes. So before we get into it, a bit of historical context. What do we talk about when we talk about software internal developer platforms? So on one hand, we start with dev versus ops, the usual thing. Development and operations on development on one side and operation on the other side, having to, work with code thrown over the fence. We're dealing with snowflakes, operational snowflakes and cluster, until we got to DevOps. And then when we got to DevOps, everybody was like, "Oh my God, I love DevOps because it means that I'm fast, high velocity at developing things because I use and adopt DevOps. I have velocity and I have autonomy. My cross-functional teams are autonomous and able to operate at speed and at pace without being constrained by anything." What is the extreme? If you want the taken to the extreme, this is Amazon's famous motto: you build it, you own it, you run it. If you build your own code, you're gonna run it. So far, so good. But I assume that most of you that work and have worked in startups, that have worked in enterprise, have been in the situation in which this is also a problem. Why? It's a problem because I assume that most of you will have seen that startup where there are 20 engineers and they use 21 different programming languages because they're all very autonomous, or that large enterprise where you have one business unit here that uses Golang and the other one uses Node.js on the other corner, and they don't talk to each other. So velocity and autonomy means reduced coordination, which means yes, speed, but it also means a whole range of other problems, which are here. So we're seeing silos because they don't talk to each other anymore. They don't have to. Why would they do that? A lot of tribal knowledge in itself, maintenance overhead. 5 engineers in a corner have lots of autonomy, they build whatever they want, they leave, and then as a company, who's going to maintain that? And the cost of maintaining this, the actual cost, it is really, really significant. And so you're ending up in this nightmare of governance and compliance. You end up with a lot of MVPs that don't get to production because your security and compliance function will say, "Oh, by the way, great idea, you have all this autonomy, but we don't really do things this way here." So there are trade-offs. And we realize this reality is, which is unregulated autonomy is proportional to complexity and cost. To the point that, and I'm going to be tell you a little story here, to the point that when a company or a startup is acquired and is evaluated for acquisition, so there is a VC that wants to make an investment into a startup, or there's a private equity firm that wants to acquire the startup, having a sprawl of technologies is a negative multiplier on the valuation of the company. So the company is worth less because their technological stack, it's a bit of a mess. So how to solve this? Well, I don't come up with the ideas. This has been solved in the 90s, right? So ServiceNow, ticketing systems, very, very old stuff. In the 90s, I'm a developer. I need a computer, I need a machine, I need a VM. What do? I open a ticket, I create a ticket, and then somewhere in the back office, in the support team, will give me a VM, will give me a computer just to deploy. Happy times, I'm happy, but I'm also constrained now because you're forcing my technical choices. So how many of you are happy with your IT support team? Nobody is. Nobody is happy. So, oh my God, we have the best ticketing system out there, right? Typically, this is not the best thing. So we've all realized from the 90s that a ticketing system is not the best solution. And this, whatever is the level to it, because in the 90s, I asked for a computer. In the 2000, with a ticket, I asked for a VM. In 2010, I opened a ticket to get an AWS account. It's the same thing. I'm still constrained by somebody. So all these platforms, all this first generation, what I call first generation of developer platform, things that enable you to deploy your code, things that enable you to manage your code, were done through ticketing systems. ServiceNow is the most famous one. When they were done like this, their angle, the reason why the people were doing this, because they wanted to control the cost. Ticketing systems were not designed to enable developers achieving high velocity. They were designed to reduce the operational expenses of the enterprise. We need the IT to be cheap. We don't want to invest in IT. We want it to be cheap. This is what happens when you have a CIO, typically, rather than a CTO in a large enterprise. So this responds to IT as a cost center, as I say here. So we all said, oh my God, this is terrible. We're super slow. We hate hard work like this because we're constrained by having to use that CI/CD system, which is like 20 years old. I want more autonomy. I want faster solutions. So we get to second generation developer platforms. Kubernetes. Kubernetes comes in, and a lot of what we talk about when we talk about platform teams. I'm sure that most of you have heard, most of you have worked with or in a platform team. Companies adopt platform teams not because they're cool, not because they're interesting, for a very clear reason. The article up there, the link up there, is a McKinsey report that says, by the way, any company adopts internal developer platforms and invests in developer experience increases revenue 4 to 5 times faster than companies that are not doing this. So there's a clear business case. There's an economical case for adopting developer platforms. In this developer platforms, the focus changes from operations and IT as a cost center into IT as business enabler. So we're looking at self-service model. If you want to deploy your application, what do? You go on Git, GitHub, whatever, you commit your code, and then that triggers a CI/CD pipeline that deploys in the Kubernetes cluster. You reduce cognitive load, and we've heard about cognitive load twice today already. There's a talk this morning, and then an Ignite talk about cognitive load. This is really important because reducing cognitive load means slower onboarding time, easier for developers to get to production. This is the current state of the art. This is where we are today. This is what most companies are doing. And as I said, companies are doing this because developer experience is proven to be connected to revenue growth. The more you invest in your developers, the faster you will get to revenue, the faster the company will make money. It's very clear to this. So the business case is clearly there to invest into the X and not to treat this as a cost center. And so this is proven in a number of reports as well. So we have, this is the Puppet 2021 State of DevOps report and the DevOps evolution, and it shows that companies that are good at DevOps are using internal developer platforms very well. Not all companies that use IDP are successful, but all the ones that are successful use IDPs. Perfect. So far, so good. So we have where today the industry is. We have built a business case for it, so we can go back to our managers and say, by the way, this is why you got to do it. We understand that a newer generation of developer platforms is focused on generating value for the business and is focused on generating revenue. And as a consequence as well, it increases developer velocity, it increases developer experience. All of this, so far, so good. So what are these second generation developer platforms? Quickly. So how do they materialize? As I said, 99% of cases, most of the people in the audience, is a Kubernetes-based platform. This is your platform team. All of this platform, what does it offer you today? It will offer you, as we said, environment provisioning. I want to deploy, my development environment. I want to deploy my integration environment, QA environments. Offers observability. So the way in which we monitor our applications is exactly the same across the stack. The way in which our developer teams are notified is exactly the same. We're all using PagerDuty and we're all connected to that. The way in which we manage our application is the same. The way in which we control our cost is the same, and this is offered by the platform. The way in which we look at our service catalog, this is another key enabler of developer platforms. Often overlooked, but today service catalog means a portal or a website where you go there and you see all the applications deployed within the company, especially in enterprises. Amazon is a famous one, right? When they talk about two-pizza team, when they talk about that level of autonomy, internal service catalogs that enable different teams to consume resources from one side of the company or the other. Hire the large Chinese firm is exactly the same thing. Tencent as well. And then security reviews, the way in which we control security is the same thing. We control it, we embed security within this. This structure here is a structure designed to support the you build it, you run it system. It's built around that, where we have service catalogs as core foundational items of a developer platform. So it's a way for the company to keep track of ownership of all the metadata of the software, as I said. So I know that team A has this API, internal API. Team B could use that internal API and doesn't have to coordinate how to use it or whatever. It can just go to the service catalog and know that exists and use it as well. So we're talking about this as an API, as I said. We're talking about service templating. If a new application comes up in the company, we have to deploy that in Kubernetes. We don't have to do everything from scratch. Most configuration has already been written, is already available. So far, so good. The trade-off here, which was a point that was touched in one of the Ignite talks as well, is the notorious conundrum between developer autonomy and standardization. So you build it, you run it, it's great, but it means technologies for all. Standardization is much easier to manage, but it means developers are slow. So how do we counteract that? This doesn't happen all the times, but the most advanced developer platforms will offer what we call golden paths. This is a fundamental concept. The idea here is, the big problem of developer platforms is that if you create something that works in 95% of cases, you're gonna have a number of very senior developers in their corner, and those senior developers want to do something different. The example is simple. You have a GitHub repo that deploys the same, that when you commit to like a YAML file, will deploy the same Terraform code, but maybe that developer needs a different configuration of an underlying database, needs a different configuration of an underlying system, and so that doesn't work for them. So what do they do? What can they do? Option one, get frustrated and say, oh, by the way, our internal platform doesn't work for us, so we need to do something else and build a new one. Option two, you say, oh, okay, I'm not gonna care about that. I'm just gonna do my thing and talk to my friend, Brent, down there in the corner. Brent will enable me. So you have an internal black market. You know when you speak to companies, talk to companies, and there's always that one person that enables everything? That is the game. The game is that person enables all the external paths because the main path cannot be followed. So you define this golden idea. The idea of a golden path is a way of enabling velocity and standardization without restricting your developers. Very simple idea. As a platform team, as a platform team, when you're building your IDP, you say, if you want the easy way, the golden way is use my YAML. Use my YAML, adopt my YAML, deploy the application in the standard ways. If you do that, you're gonna get compliance for free. You don't have to pay for it because our auditing team has already checked everything out, so you can deploy very, very easily. If instead you wanna go your own way, not a problem, thumbs up. We're gonna create a way for you to connect to Kube APIs and deploy directly with your own authentication. We're not gonna constrain you into our CI/CD. But be advised, if you do that, you have to pay. The price you have to pay is that you're gonna have to talk again with that nightmare of security and compliance that will slow you down massively. So I enable the senior developers without I enable the junior developers without constraining the senior developers. The idea of a golden path. And the idea as well in this sense of communities of practice, when we hear a system, company where you have a community of people that are very experienced in somebody share best practices, Spotify model in this case. It's a way for doing this. The other important thing with community of practice, which is with golden path, which is typically often referred when I say, oh, but developer platforms are really good, people say, if you do it too much, we lose touch with production. If we use too much of an IDP and we don't touch Kubernetes anymore, we don't touch anything above it, and everything is kind of like controlled behind this black box, I lose touch with how my application actually operates at a scale. So by enabling golden paths in the right way, we avoid this, but we need to provide observability as well with that. So we use in platform teams. Every company is using platform teams. Nothing really major about this. A super specialized team that is supporting the platforms, effectively a form of internal consultants for the company that are generating value. These are revenue generating for they're not directly, they're indirectly revenue generating for the company, and support the work of a number of different teams. They are the glue, effectively, that connects Kubernetes, the open source project, to our implementation of an IDP, because we have all these dependencies here and there. So, form of knowledge sharing as well. Still, version 2 of developer platforms are not perfect. Why? Well, number one, because they're not complete. Because most companies are using Kubernetes, but in that corner down there are 3 developers that are using Lambda. They deploy with serverless. They don't care about Kube. They are next gen again. And so what do? Like, we don't really offer a managed version of Lambda in our internal developer platforms. We're constrained. They're not complete because we're using CloudWatch when we monitor Lambda. We're using Azure Monitor, whatever that is. But we're using Prometheus when we monitor Kubernetes. And so we don't really head up. Our platform is not feature complete. And so it's also hard to operationalize. There's a number of problems. We need more. We have a problem with our cognitive load. Once again, there's too much I have to learn as a developer for me to be productive from day one, because there's too much tooling around this. Not only, we're evolving the game here, and think about something else. Think about the way in which you store information in the company. As a developer, at the end of the day, some of the information that you need to do your work is in GitHub. Some of the information you need to do your work is in Confluence, in Google Drive, in a myriad of other places as well. So maybe we need something else. We need an evolution of this, which is the idea of what I call third-generation developer platforms. This is the most up-to-date implementation I created. By the way, the idea of creating generational approach to this is mine because the industry has not reached consensus yet. If you think about this, in the JavaScript world, we had Angular, we had React. Nobody deploys with Angular version 1 anymore. People are using React, Redux, Svelte. There has been a generational approach and an evolution to this. In the IDP worlds, just because it has not been looked at so far and the interest is only coming up now, we don't have that approach yet. But it's quite clear if you think about this. If you think about the core premise, which is, I want to make my developers fast, I want to make my developers really quick, I want to give them a platform for them to be able to generate value immediately and to ultimately increase the revenue of the company. In other words, I want to give them something that is everything they need outside their REPL, their GitHub, because we're using Git, and their IDE, everything. And with everything, I mean, why not Google Calendar? Why is Google Calendar not part of our developer platforms? We're all in a whole bunch of meetings. Why is Jira not offered by a platform team? And this is very interesting. So the idea here is a shift between purely infra-related concerns to company-wide concerns. So this, what you see here, is the description of a project, an open source project, currently sandboxed at CNCF, called Backstage. Backstage is a project which is the most advanced project in the IDP world. Was sponsored by Spotify. Is probably the most popular Spotify-backed open source project. You can Google it up and find a lot of information on Backstage online. Backstage started only a couple of years ago, so March 2020. It's very, very recent. And at its core, and it started as a portal, as a website. It's a website with a service catalog native within Kubernetes. So you deploy Backstage, this connects to your Kubernetes cluster, and you see all the applications. And then you add metadata on top. So you say, given the annotation on the YAML of the description in Kubernetes, here is the team that owns that application. Here is how you can talk to them and reach out to them and consume them, their ideas as well. And now, Backstage with a plugin system as more as templating for CI/CD. So I go to one website, I see all the applications deployed within the company, I see how to deploy those applications, deploy new applications. I see the documentation, which is standardized across all the various applications. I see the idea of a homepage where maybe we see company-wide announcements. Oh, we created a new team with 5 new people. They joined the company. You see that in your internal developer platform or portal. It's the most mature project, but there are also not there are closed source alternatives. There are SaaS solution, Humanitech and Mia platforms are the most famous one. They are very similar to Backstage if you want, a bit more feature complete. Backstage is not super mature yet. The closed source SaaS are better, but at the same time, this is a tool that you need to integrate with your systems. So as much. Let's look at a couple of screenshots for Backstage, as I was saying. So this is the catalog, all your applications there, and you can see how powerful this game is, because if in my company you're using AWS, Azure, GCP, you're using some other cloud provider, what happens? Well, we don't really know how much our application costs because we have some pieces here, some pieces there, and we don't have a standardized way of looking at that. But through a plugin in Backstage, I can directly connect the cost of the application into the same portal. So you see how we're aggregating a number of things and bringing everything together in one place, really enabling the idea of this, the core ideas behind this. We can see also the dependencies around this. So this software depends on the other microservice that depends on the other microservice that is perhaps managed by a different team that has this SLA or that SLA. Once again, DORA report, State of DevOps 2021, DORA from Google, that report will tell you the importance of reliability. And there was an Ignite talk as well from Pete earlier, how reliability is important and how reliability is a predictor of success within the company. So Backstage used and abused by other companies as well. People are building on top of it. Zalando, it's a famous company I'm sure you'll know about, e-commerce company. They built their machine learning model platform on top of Backstage. So the way in which they consume and share not applications but machine learning models within Zalando is backed by Backstage. They customize Backstage for doing it. And you see on the left as well the internal version from Spotify of Backstage itself, which is even more feature complete than the open source version. So this is the idea. The idea is a newer concept of a platform that has a number of concerns within it that enables you to operate at speed. In the last couple of minutes, I want to talk about build versus buy. So should you build or should you buy your developer platforms? We said in this case, it is a bit of a false conundrum because most companies, if you're not really big, if you're not like a large bank, you're not building it from scratch. You're not building your developer platform from scratch. You're starting from Backstage, from some other open source projects as well that you add there. Still, one thing I want to tell you in this case, so when we talk about open source and we talk about outsource as well, a lot of concerns. Developer platforms are a key enabler of the companies. They're connected with a number of internal and external integrations that you need as a company. So these are core tools for you. Build versus buy, in this case, is a false conundrum that you have there. But it's an important choice to make. If you're buying Humanitech, if you're buying a SaaS, you're getting velocity initially, but you're still going to need to build integration around it. If you're using Backstage, you're going to spend a bit more time building it, but you will have more power and more control of the roadmap as well, given also the status that Backstage has of being an open source project. So we're going to skip through this. This is an important figure when I say the cost of how much everything costs. So I wanted to give this because so you have a bit of an idea. My estimate is if you're taking Backstage today from GitHub and you're customizing Backstage for your own application in your company, you're typically going to need 6 FTEs, 6 people to build it, and then 3 people per year to maintain it on average. These are numbers that are available online as well. You can think about this. This is very expensive. Bringing in the system is very expensive, but there is a logic behind it. The logic is it will enable the revenue of the company as well. So this is the information you need to go back to your manager and say, hey, why don't we bring in Backstage next that makes us fast, that gives us all these big benefits there as well. If you're instead not interested in Backstage, you can buy it. If you're buying it, well, you're making other trade-offs and you're getting some initial velocity, but as I said, it's a very deeply integrated idea within your systems, especially if you're embedding Google Docs or Google Calendar in Backstage or in your developer platforms. So as a startup as well, it's a super common question that I get as a startup, when to do it. There are no hard and fast rules, but rule of thumb, roughly 100 people. When you get to 100 people in your startup. In the end, final slide, takeaways. Developer platforms are amazing. They really can change the way which your company operates and your life as a developer gets better. If you're embedding a developer platform in your company, think about golden paths. Don't constrain your senior developer, but enable your junior developer. Think about a low context culture that will make everything build faster. Think about self-service. Don't think about a ticketing system. Don't think about ask brand to give access, but enable people to do it autonomously. They will really like this. They will really like you as well. And in the end, whatever you're doing when adopting platform, given the cost of all of this, think about clear success metrics before and after the project, and you'll be successful in that. Thank you for your time today. If you have any questions after the talk, okay?
All right, thank you so much. So in the interest of time, we'll keep the questions off stage. So please do find them in the hallway later today, maybe at the social event if we'll see you there.
Yeah.
Thanks again. Give him a round of applause.
Thank you.